Okay, now the power prices on the carbon tax, which is going to be, well, constantly a big story, but a bigger story from July the 1st. The states are starting to put out details of what it's going to cost individually in each of their states. New South Wales was the first to declare. Here's Greg Combet.
It is bang on what the Treasury forecast, approximately $3.30 a week averaged across households in New South Wales. And of course, to deal with that, the government is providing an average of $10.10 per week in assistance to households across New South Wales. Now, Tony Abbott's run around trying to terrify everyone in a gutless performance, standing in front of groups of pensioners, terrifying them for month after month. But now, of course, we're seeing that he's misled people, deceived people.
So if Julia Gillard wanted to take the pressure off Australian families, if she wanted to make it easier for Australian families to meet their bills, she could cut those increases in half by abolishing the carbon tax.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, if you've got an 18% increase in power prices, half of that, roughly half of that, is due to the fact that they're putting in new poles and wires and so on, and the other half will be the carbon tax. Now, the situation in South Australia, where they've already declared, is, according to Christopher Pyne, far worse. Here he is.
Can I just remind people that electricity prices in Adelaide have risen 18% in the last 12 months. And the Energy Users Association of Australia says that from July the 1st, because of the carbon tax, South Australia will have the highest electricity prices in the world.
Now, Brian, the other factor in all of this is wind and solar. Now, I think it probably has a bigger effect for whatever reason in South Australia than it does in New South Wales. But have a look at this graphic as we put it up, and it shows that it's negligible, really.
That's in New South Wales. But that's the green scheme's other than the carbon tax, right?
Yes.
The other, you've basically got the cost of the poles and wires going up by almost the same as the carbon tax.
Yep.
But the other interesting thing in there, it's not on that graph I don't think, is that the cost of the generating the power actually fell by not a lot, but 0.8%. And the really interesting thing is Labor must be kicking itself over this. There is no reason at all while there's cost of those wires and poles and wires should be going up. There is a crazy, which they presided over, a crazy regulatory regime which just lets the power company, the distributing companies, spend whatever they like on capital works, and the regulator has to say, we'll give you a big tick on that, put up your prices as much as that costs, plus a generous profit margin.
So they're actually overspending on
they're gold-plating the thing. Well, they've got no incentive not to spend more. If you know that no matter how much you spend, you'll be allowed to put up your prices to cover it. There are plenty of ways in which you can actually don't have to spend anything more on the capital expenditure side of the networks. And the other one that's missing is privatisation. The two states that have privatised their networks, South Australia and Victoria, have lower increases in their network costs into the future than Queensland and New South Wales, despite the election of coalition governments in those states. They are not privatising.
So is it the state governments that wasn't overseeing this properly?
No, but it was the federal regulator is now called the Australian Energy Regulator. It's a joint sort of state-federal thing. But I cannot believe, and some of the all the regulators are complaining about it, including Rod Sims complained about it at one of the closed sessions of the Economics Forum on Wednesday. Without this crazy rule, Labor would only have to worry about the carbon tax. Now it's got to worry about, into the future, the Energy Users of Australia projected, based on what this regulator has already given permission for, that the distributing costs will go up in real terms by 7% a year between now and 2015.
And Mark, there's a challenge. How does the government separate that out from the one that they are responsible for and the one that they're compensating people for?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, it's an incredibly hard task at the moment, and they haven't really succeeded. They've even been taking on water for the electricity increases that have been occurring even before the carbon taxes come in. And
yes, but then as Brian points out, they are partly responsible. Well, they could have kept an eye on it.
Well, they're responsible in some measure, but the point is there have been, there's been a capital strike in electricity generation and distribution for a period of time, and then now there's been, as Brian says, a lot of money being spent on it as well.
There's a lot of catch-up. I mean, you've got, on that point, 60%, I think, in 3 years in terms of electricity prices in South Australia. In WA, it's 57% in the past 3 years. Now, and now this has become such an issue in WA that Colin Barnett only increased electricity prices by 3.5%, excluding the carbon tax, 3.5% this year, because he's got an election in 9 months' time. And yet I know that there are people in Treasury who think that he should have just kept the price going up, because there is an underinvestment in some of the poles and wires. And just before you jump in, Brian, there is a point here on the... yeah, cheeky man. There is a... if you think that prices don't actually have an impact, there's an interesting stuff that came out of Synergy data, which was that the average household energy use in WA actually peaked in 2010 and it started decreasing in 2011. And, you know, we've all got examples of why that happens in our own houses. I mean, I happen to have two tellers, very lucky. We've got a plasma TV. You could fry an egg on that TV. But we've got an LED, and it uses very little energy. So, you know, with energy prices getting higher, we are going to start making choices.
But I used to believe that stuff about the need for big investment. It's not true when you look at it, including that the demand for energy is falling. Sorry, the actual, as you've just pointed out.
Demand's falling and the wholesale price is falling.
Yes, and you've got a lot of money being spent on distribution networks, which I won't go into the reasons. There is no need for that money to be spent at all. It is just crazy.
Right.
And
what happens on
regulations?
Sorry, what happens on July the 1st then? The opposition's gearing up for quite a massive campaign, no doubt. They'll have shadow ministers and members all over the country.
Well, they will, and these people will be attempting to sort of, I don't know, nuance the python squeeze as distinct from the cobra strike.
It's a bit hard to kind of illustrate it, isn't it? I suppose you could put a time-lapse camera on the sky and capture the moment, but it's...
that's right. Is it getting closer?
But it'll be the rhetoric only sort of cranked up a bit.
Well, I think so, and I think, you know, the government's hopes of this just going away effectively after July seem equally implausible. It seems to me, because of what we've been talking about, these increased prices, it doesn't really matter what the anatomy is. These increased prices are just going to be seen by voters as part of an overall squeeze, part of you know, government policy, you know, visited on them. Now
there will be a bit more material for the government to work on, and the opposition to work on. The Fairfax papers today. Lenore Taylor has reported that Kevin Rudd's Global Carbon Capture and Storage, what was it? A committee? Organisation.
Institute.
It's a global institute.
Surveyed the members and found that, well, it's losing its relevance, and it quotes the new chief executive as saying that $100 million that they were given initially was too much, and it's actually impossible to spend that amount of money responsibly, Brian.
I think that's fair enough. All up there spending over $2 billion on carbon capture and storage, which will never, ever be able to be commercially viable for one simple reason, and that is that it takes so much energy to compress the gas that it would put half the power produced by a brown coal-fired station has to be used to compress the gas. So cutting in half the amount going to the grid. With black coal, it's 30%, and the laws of physics mean you can't reduce that percentage.